Hello, everybody. See a few of you there. Today, and do introductions, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm standing on the land of the Gimwoy, Wallabara, Yidinji and Yiddiganji peoples up here in Cairns, and I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and acknowledge that you are all standing on the lands of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples wherever you are, and we all pay our respects to those peoples. And I certainly bring greetings from my peoples, the Quandamooka peoples, from Minduraba, or as you may know it, North Stradbroke Island, which is just off the coast of Queensland. My name's Dean Parkin. I'm the director of From the Heart, and I'm absolutely chuffed to be here with you today to talk to you about the campaign and to share some information with you and have some conversations around what we're on about as a campaign. Many of you have been supporting us right from the beginning and right from the Uluru Statement back in 2017. So just wanted to share some information. Hopefully this is a series of webinars that we'll do over the course of the next little while. And certainly I'll be looking to bring other people on board, other voices on board to share some of their experiences about why this campaign is important to them. Just so it's not just me talking all the time. You'll quickly get very bored of that. I would like to thank you all for joining. We had an absolutely outstanding response to this invitation to this webinar. We had about 400 people respond really quickly. We've currently got approaching 200 people on this call right now. So just want to thank you all for showing the interest, for responding as you have, and for taking some time out to be part of this. I'd also like to thank you more generally. Many of you who are on this call have played a very significant role as to why we're still talking about the Uluru Statement 3 years on. Obviously, we've had some significant leadership from people like Arnie Pat Anderson and Professor Megan Davis and Noel Pearson and other leaders around the country, other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leaders across the country who have been involved with the Uluru Statement from the beginning and have kept this conversation alive. But it literally has been people like yourselves from all walks of life who, through conversations, through advocacy, through your commitment to the Uluru Statement and what Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people crafted through that, which is why we're still talking about it. You know, we've had some pretty interesting political challenges along the way, but the reason why we're still talking about it is because Australians want to see this happen. They want to keep this alive. They've bought into the vision that the Uluru Statement stood for. And so that's why we're here today to talk about how we can actually do that and what the future looks like. I might just, before I launch into the particulars of the campaign, what I want to do today is a couple of things. I want to just provide a little bit of information more broadly about the From the Heart campaign and what it is that we're standing for. And we've got a little bit of research that I want to share with you that's actually quite encouraging for where the campaign actually sits right now. There are two other issues that I'd like to canvass, two recent issues that have been sort of publicly discussed in and around the Uluru Statement, and particularly the idea of voice to Parliament enabled by the Australian Constitution that I want to cover, and then I want to leave some time for questions at the end, and I'd absolutely encourage you to send in your questions via the chat function. My colleagues Tom and Borum will be taking your questions. I get drastically confused and distracted when I try and look at all the notifications that pop up as I'm delivering. So Tom and Borum will take care of the questions, and then they'll ask me those questions at the end, and hopefully we can answer as many of those as we possibly can. And I'd just like to acknowledge and note that we're recording this session because we've had more people express interest in participating and couldn't actually make the time. So we're going to find a way to show this later. Before I start the the substance of the conversation today. I think I just wanted to share with you why this is important to me. One of the things I've found throughout this whole process is the importance of storytelling and sharing stories about why this speaks to me. And I think it also speaks to motivation and why I think it's so important. I had the great privilege of being involved with the Referendum Council as it was set up to design and run the regional dialogues that eventually concluded at the Constitutional Convention at Uluru on the 26th of May 2017, when the Uluru Statement was created and issued to the people of Australia. And my particular role in that was quite small, but I had to stand at the front of the room on a whiteboard and capture what people were saying live. The stories, the challenges, the hopes, the vision, the frustrations, and not just the intellectual ideas, but very much cultural information that was given, and absolutely a lot of heart that was shared throughout the dialogue process. I had to stand at the front of every single room for all the big plenary sessions and live capture what people were saying. And I have this method of doing it. It's called spider mapping or mind mapping, as some of you might know of it, and then play back to people what I'd heard, just to make sure that we were capturing properly exactly what people were talking about. So it meant I heard everything. I heard everything that people were talking about, and it was an absolute privilege to do that. I will also say at times it was quite challenging to be there and to hear some of the things that people were talking about. Certainly the frustrations that people were sharing, that this isn't the first time they've talked about these things, and that for many of our old people, they were very familiar with these kinds of processes. But all in all, it was an enormous privilege for me to be involved in, and because I heard those stories, because I heard the hopes and the vision from people live, the Uluru Statement, when it was created, made absolute sense to me. The continuum that it represented, not just through that process of the Referendum Council, but from what people were talking about for decades. We did these history videos where the continuity and the repetitiveness of what people have been calling for over these years meant that when Voice Treaty Truth emerged out of the Uluru Statement, it shouldn't have surprised anybody that had spent 5 minutes in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander affairs or understood anything about Australian history. So, as I say, great privilege, and something that drives me, because when I think about those people and what they gave from all walks of life around our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, and the generosity of which they shared their stories in this process, and how that all came together, it reminds me on a daily basis, when things do get tough sometimes, as they do when advocating for change, it's a reminder back to those voices that that's the reason why we're doing this. That's the reason why we must continue. So I'm sure in some way, shape or form, every single one of you have your own version of that story. And I think it's really important as we progress throughout this campaign that you share that. That's how we're going to connect. That's how we're going to connect with each other. That's how we're going to connect in unity in pushing this movement forward, by sharing those stories together. So I'd absolutely, wherever you can, with whomever, please do share why this is important to you, because everybody's got a stake in this. Every single Australian who is inspired by the Uluru Statement from the heart, who buys into its vision, has got a stake in helping push it forward. It was issued to all Australians as an invitation, and I'm so pleased that more and more Australians are taking up that invitation and pushing forward. So that's just a little bit about me and my background. The campaign, as we know it now, From the Heart, really kicked off in earnest at the beginning of this year, and I'm just going to share a couple of slides. I won't spend too much time on this, but just to give you a bit of a sense on the campaign and what people are saying about it, I think is really, really important. As I said at the beginning, Uluru Statement was crafted on the 26th of May 2017. It's been over 3 years now since the Uluru Statement was crafted. I think it's really important to acknowledge, as I said earlier, that decades of work led into this. We've had many different statements like the Barunga Statement, the Yirrkala Bark petitions. We've had big national movements. We've had local movements, regional movements. All of this is built up over time, and those issues continue to be raised, and the hopes in how we can start to address some of these issues also continue to be raised. So lots of work leading up to the Uluru Statement. Then the Uluru Statement was issued in a magnificent moment, as I said, just over 3 years ago, and that's when the hard work really began, to be honest. The reason why we think the moment is now for this particular campaign is because we have this iconic statement. We have this iconic cultural statement, this iconic reform statement, and it absolutely gives us a very clear way forward through voice, treaty, truth. We also have a government agenda for constitutional recognition, which was reiterated at the last election. We also have the opposition party also committed to constitutional recognition as well. So that political buy-in to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander constitutional recognition is absolutely there. It's something we have to keep pressing and keep pushing, but it is absolutely there. We've also had these global movements for change, and most notably, Black Lives Matter has been one that's absolutely really burst into the Australian consciousness this year. And that's been important because it's been important to raise the profile more generally around issues like Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander justice, the ongoing tragedy and shame of deaths in custody, and other issues like that. I do want to say that it's not just a matter of equating Black Lives Matters with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander efforts for reform or even the Uluru Statement itself. While it has amplified some of the messaging, I do want to make the point that it's a different movement. We certainly have alignment and have empathy for that movement, but it's different. And I think it's really important to mention that. I mean, we talked about incarceration and youth detention back in 2017 in the Uluru Statement itself, and our people have been talking about these issues for so long. So just want to make that acknowledgement. We've also seen what's happened with the coronavirus too, and I'm hoping that you're all safe and well, and particularly to those that are dialing in from Victoria. Thoughts are with you. But it's also showcased what happens when experts work really well with governments, and we can see what change can actually, the change that can actually occur, the progress that can actually be achieved. So, and we've seen that absolutely in really clear terms with the response from particularly remote Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities who acted well in advance of governments, well in advance of even our own health services. Those communities themselves made really early decisions. They could see what was happening with the pandemic, and they made really early decisions to close their communities down. And last time I saw the statistics, touch wood and hoping it stays this way, those communities have done an incredible job in ensuring that the coronavirus hasn't found its way to remote and very remote communities. So it shows what happens when self-determination is properly exercised, when Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people can have a say and are empowered to act in their own people's interests, that in this case, a really, really strong action resulted in a very, very good result. And a result that, incidentally, according to the statistics in terms of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander infection rate, it's the one time Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are on the good side of the statistics. We're actually underrepresented with regards to the coronavirus. So it's not that we wish to be better than everybody else, but it is actually quite nice for once to have achieved that. And I think, as it shows what can happen when genuine empowerment and self-determination has a chance to flourish. So all of that has meant that at the beginning of this year, a few of us came together and decided that we needed to really organise and throw the kitchen sink at a full throttled campaign to really drive the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and in particular, as a priority, the voice to Parliament that is enabled by the Australian Constitution. I think it's really important to emphasise that our mandate is 100% alignment to the Uluru Statement. We don't have any other mandate. We can't chop and change and decide we're going to amend it or pick a particular part of it. We are 100% guided by the Uluru Statement, and that is our campaign mandate. We did some research at the beginning just to understand public opinion 3 years on, and what we found was actually quite encouraging. We did some research in March this year, and then subsequently some further research in June just to test what had happened. And in summary, what you can see from that chart is that support for a voice to Parliament is growing among the Australian people. We started with 49% of Australians saying they would vote yes if a referendum were held in March this year. That has grown to 56% in June. You'll see that those that are opposed are actually, those numbers are quite small. In fact, decreased from March from 20% to 17%. The really interesting part is that we've got a sizable group of Australians that are undecided, I think for a bunch of reasons, probably education and understanding what the Uluru Statement and a voice to Parliament is about. So it's actually, this is a really good position for us to start a campaign. And our challenge now is obviously to put as much education into the space, because we understand through our research that the more people understand and are aware of the Uluru Statement from the Heart and a voice to Parliament, the more likely they are to support it. So awareness and understanding translates really closely into support. So given where we are, given the restrictions that we have around the coronavirus and what that's meant for all of us in our lives and our work, but in particular for this campaign, it's about getting as much information out there as possible, because we know in time that translates across into support. So for someone who's been around this since its inception, who has often been told publicly and through the media that it hasn't got a chance, when I saw these numbers and I saw the growth in support already, it gave me great heart and great confidence. We know that polling is notoriously fickle, and we're certainly not in a position to rest on any laurels, that is for sure. You just don't do that in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander reform, but it does give us a lot of confidence that with some effort, we can really drive that support further. Interestingly, we did the research for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in particular in March, and that support is even stronger at 71%. Again, though, we still have much work to do to further share the message. Not everybody was involved in the Uluru Statement's creation, and so we have to do some more work, constantly do more work to make sure that more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are getting behind and supporting supporting the campaign. But again, quite encouraging. And I also want to acknowledge that there are different views out there that people, there are some Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that are not supportive, which is what you'd expect in any community, that there are different views. Surprise, surprise. So it's okay that there are diverse perspectives. I always say though, if we accept that there are diverse perspectives, we must also accept when there is historic mandate and historic consensus, which is what the Uluru Statement has done. Just for people who are, we know that people want to support this as much as they possibly can. And so we also tested some messages that we know that really resonate with people and really generate that further support and understanding of what it is that we're on about. And there's sort of 4 really key messages that resonate very strongly. You know, this whole idea of the Aussie sense of egalitarianism, this idea of a fair go. There is this sense that throughout our history, we know that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people haven't always been given a fair go, which is a fairly mild way of putting it. But that this is time. This is our chance. This is our generation's chance as Australians to give Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people a fair go through a voice to Parliament, through a historic referendum. As I mentioned, through the coronavirus, and I think people have already picked up on this, this is a really practical thing to do. None of us are advocating to change the Constitution just because it's something that we flippantly like to do. That it's some abstract intellectual exercise that only elite Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, so-called elite, I really don't like that term, but that so-called elite Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are interested in. I can attest to the stories that I heard throughout the referendum council process that there was a very, very strong appetite for a practical reform that would have a real impact on the lives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, which is why the voice to Parliament really stood out as the key proposal to change the Constitution. And the constitutional protection means that the voice has certainty and continuity. It's really important. It's not something that can be added on or taken off, because the issues that we're dealing with are generational. We're not going to fix some of the challenges our communities are facing in the next term of Parliament, this term of Parliament, the next term of Parliament, maybe even the next few. And we saw that through some of the targets that were released earlier this year around closing the gap. One of them envisaged that we wouldn't close the incarceration gap until 2093. So if the system is saying that we're not going to reach parity in the incarceration rates for another 73 years, then it makes sense that the voice that advises the Parliament and brings the expertise of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to those issues has that continuity and certainty, because we're going to need it there for some time to come. The idea that it's safe, that we've had 2 former Chief Justices of Australia, Justices French and Justice Gleeson, write quite strongly that this is constitutionally the most safe option, that it's the most practical way to deal with this issue of constitutional recognition. That's really important. There's been a bit of misinformation put out there that it's a radical change, and in fact it's the most conservative of the options that were put forward. So and the safest. So that's really important that we know that. And then, as I said, this sense that it's time, that we did this in 1967. We did this in a different time. The nation came together and voted in a historic referendum, in the largest yes vote proportionally ever given. We could do it then. We can absolutely do it now. And at a time when I think people are seeking a sense of community and a sense of purpose and a sense of unity, this is a proposal on the table for all Australians to get behind as a unifying moment that we can all support and we can all make happen. So it's fair, it's practical, it's safe, and it's time. And this is pretty much the basis of what we know, and the basis of 3 years later from Uluru. This idea, the key goals for our campaign is to build awareness, knowing that translates into support down the track. We're absolutely about promoting the constitutionally protected voice to Parliament. We're not resiling from that 1 second. The constitutional change must occur. We want to mobilise you, the people of Australia, in a movement of support. You have a standing invitation to participate. We didn't actually issue the Uluru Statement as a petition or a submission to governments. It was issued to the people of Australia as an invitation. Therefore, it is the people of Australia who must respond. And ultimately, the ultimate goal, it's a very, very clear black or white, so to speak, result for us in the end. That being a successful referendum to change the constitution to enable an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice to Parliament. So that's the task. That's what From the Heart's about. That's what all of our work so far and into the future is about. It's pretty clear. And as I say, it's very much an invitation to all of you to be part of this movement, to be part of this historic change. I'll just stop that there. So, so hopefully, and obviously you can visit our website, fromtheheart.com.au, and that will give you more information about the campaign. We've got some resources in there, FAQs, toolkits that can help you deepen your understanding. We've got some stories there as well from both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and non-Indigenous Australians about why the Uluru Statement is important to them. And I really encourage you to participate in that in whichever way you can, and would love for you to send through your stories of support, videos. Get creative. The Catholics in Coalition for Peace and Justice sent through a cracker of a video very recently, which is up on the website. I know they really enjoyed creating it, and I'd encourage you all as much as possible to participate in that. I just want to mention two issues, two recent issues that you might have seen in the media, just to provide some clarity and a bit of perspective from us, and hopefully this helps inform your thinking. We've recently heard through the media proposals to change the order of the reforms in the Uluru Statement. So the Uluru Statement talked about voice, treaty, and truth very, very clearly. And there's been some proposals more recently that says, well, we should just change that. If we just tweak the order, or not tweak it, turn it upside down, we should start with truth. We should then move to treaties, and then we should talk about voice, because that appears to be a more logical sequencing of reforms. I think it's really important to say that this isn't just, it's not just a cosmetic tweaking of the words. You can't just alter the words and think it's still the same. And in fact, changing the order of the reforms pushes this away from being consistent with the Uluru Statement and pushes it into something else. That is not the Uluru Statement. That hasn't been developed by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. There's a very important strategic reason why the reforms were ordered: voice, treaty, truth. And the Uluru Statement talks about it quite clearly in terms of the torment of our powerlessness. And it's not always the favourite term within the Uluru Statement because it doesn't speak to empowerment at all. But it speaks to the reality that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, just by virtue of our extreme minority status in a democratic sense within our own country, being only 3% of the population, we have very limited structural power, in being able to influence and and impact on decision makers about things that happen to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So what we really need to do is we need the structural reforms that start to address that, which is why the voice to Parliament with the constitution enablement was put forward as the first proposal. I think it also underestimates, and I've heard this quite a bit from well-meaning people, and I do mean this, from well-meaning people who have said we should start with truth first, because from a kind of moral urgency perspective, who can argue with the idea that we should be telling truth first? What Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people knew through the crafting of the Uluru Statement from the Heart is actually truth-telling is going to be the hardest reform. We know that. We know how hard it is to have these conversations in our country. We don't currently have the institutions and the mechanisms for us to have that conversation well. And you see it every single year if we start talking about statues in a park or issues like that. We know that truth-telling is going to be very, very challenging for our country. And it's necessary, and we all agree on that. But we need to make sure that we have the institutions in place so that, importantly, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples can be involved in that process on a fair and equitable basis. That this isn't yet another process that's done to and on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples without our having a very, very leading role in this process as well. So, we need to address the structural disempowerment, and we need to do that now. We know that all the old reports and committees and inquiries and royal commissions have said exactly the same thing for decades and decades: empowerment and self-determination. So we must start there with the voice to Parliament, enabled by the Constitution. We know that truth-telling and treaty making are going to be harder. We know that these are tougher reforms to get up. So, and the last thing I'll say is that it's actually, we need to respect the cultural icon, the political icon that the Uluru Statement represents. This historic consensus of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people never having done this before, coming together and speaking very confidently on that voice treaty truth. It's not a Lego set, the Uluru Statement from the Heart. You can't just dismantle the pieces and rebuild them in a way that you think is right. We must respect the consensus and the mandate that the Uluru Statement represents. So I think it's really important that we don't fall into the trap of thinking if we just tweak the order of it, that we're somehow still retaining integrity to the Uluru Statement from the Heart and what people have talked about. I'm here to say very, very clearly that we must stick to voice treaty truth in that reform order, and that there isn't an alternative to that. Lastly, the other issue I want to talk to, and then we'll go to some of the questions that you guys have been putting through to Tom and the team while I've been speaking. You might have read recently that Professor Marcia Langton and Tom Kalmar have been co-chairing a process called the Codesign process for a voice. They've been working on this for approximately 9 months, and are coming to the conclusion, and this really stemmed from work that followed the Uluru Statement. The Joint Select Committee into Constitutional Recognition that was co-chaired by Senator Pat Dodson and Julian Lisa recommended that there be a co-design process to really flesh out what the voice to Parliament might actually look like. So what are some of the form and function details of what a voice to Parliament might look like, and really really importantly using that to dispel some of the, I guess, scaremongering that happened when the Uluru Statement first came out about what the voice would or would not look like. So that committee recommended a two-stage process. Firstly, it said there should be a process of co-design to work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and government agencies and other people to flesh out what a voice could look like. And then after that, the second stage of that process, we then sit down and discuss what the constitutional and legislative arrangements should be to bring the voice to life. So, so Minister Ken Wyatt was tasked with leading that co-design process, which kicked off at the end of last year. Incidentally, the Prime Minister very clearly stated in his Closing the Gap speech this year in February that the government was committed to that two-stage process, that this co-design process would happen, and then following that co-design process, we will have a conversation around the legislative and constitutional arrangements that should sit around it. And so the co-design process has continued. What we know now through a story recently this week is that that process is nearing its conclusion, and that there will be a public consultation process that will kick off towards the end of this year, once the government has signed off on the interim report. And I think it's really important to bring people's attention to that process. We need to make sure that, as I said before, the key elements of the voice come through, and that what was said through the Uluru Statement comes through very, very loudly and strongly through that process. That those tasked with leading the co-design process hear very loudly and very clearly that there must be a voice to Parliament, that there must be the constitutional enablement of it, and that this is the way for us to move forward. This is the way for us to dignify the Uluru Statement from the heart. This is the way to seize a historic opportunity to actually make the changes that we really want to make. So from the heart, our campaign, and I encourage you to keep checking on the website, we will be providing information and support for people to participate in that consultation process. It's a very real, it's a very practical way that people can support the Uluru Statement, that they can support the call for a voice to Parliament. So I just want to flag that now, and over the course of the next month or so, while we continue to run these webinars, those that may chime in regularly will hear me say this again and again, because it's important that we highlight it, bring it to attention, and make sure that people know about it so we can absolutely participate in it. Lastly, trying to preempt the one question that gets asked every single time: what can I do? And I love that question, because it shows the intention of people wanting to support and wanting to participate. At this stage of where we are in the campaign, we are absolutely focused on distributing as much information as we possibly can through our website, through our social media channels, generating as much support and following as we possibly can. And so I really ask that you encourage your networks to sign up to the website fromtheheart.com.au, and on that website you'll see links to our social media channels. Follow them, share them, promote them amongst your networks as much as you possibly can. It has a huge impact on the visibility of our work, on the visibility of our education and the resources and the information that we're trying to get out to as many Australians as we possibly can. So please get in there, follow those links, and sign up to those as much as you possibly can. And we really do want to hear your stories. We really want to hear whether it's a message, whether it's an email, whether it's a video recording, you know, whether it's a piece of art, whatever it is that you like to, and however you like to express yourself best. if you can send that through, and again through the website, you'll see where you can send that information, and we'd just love to be able to share it. We'd just love to be able to share your story with as many people as we possibly can, and hopefully inspire other people to participate. That's how this is going to happen. This is going to happen person by person, community by community, walking with us. So, and by keeping an eye on those websites and social media channels, you'll see the latest updates, the information that comes through, future webinars and events that we've got in the pipeline.